It's the film marketing section. This is the part of the show where we talk about a film. It could be a more recent release, a modern release. It could be a film from 20 years ago, from 25 years ago. Something that we've both enjoyed watching many, many times, but also something which gives us a lesson in how films were marketed, but also how we can use those lessons in our own marketing for our own businesses. Pascal, what shall we dissect this week?
I'm going to say, Roger, that you got a friend in me.
Uh-huh.
And I'm going to say that I know you've got troubles. I've got them too. And just in case I wasn't clear enough, I'm going to say to you, to infinity and beyond. Today, Roger, we're going to talk about Toy Story.
Toy Story. 25 years ago. How did that happen?
I have no idea. Now, what is the reason why we chose Toy Story, just for our viewers and listeners, for many reasons. One, it is probably the perfect example of the combination of different talents from different walks of life and different kind of forms of science, all the way to, obviously acting, but also because it was the very first animation film done entirely using computing and computer power. I think that's very important. It was also done by a tiny, small production company called Pixar. And I know that now Pixar has become this kind of brand and name that sort of suggests, a very large organization with a lot of power and might in the world of storytelling and film production. But back then, there were nobody, and that wasn't an easy ride for them to pull off Toy Story.
Yeah, and it sticks in the mind. I mean, I originally went to see Toy Story before I had children, but it's a film that I've watched with my son on many, many occasions. And it's one of those films, isn't it, Pascal, where they get the balance absolutely right in terms of it's entertainment for young children, and yet it's also an adult film on many levels as well. There's those knowing winks to things that we grew up with a long, long time ago, even from the selection of the toys like Mr. Potato Head and all the army soldiers and that sort of thing. And I think that when you can put together a piece of content that appeals to loads of generations at the same time, we hear a lot in the marketing world at the moment of targeting millennials, targeting Generation Z, Generation X, all of that sort of thing. And you've got to tailor your message. Here's a piece of content, a film that transcends generations. And no doubt, it will appeal to the next generation to come because it operates on all those levels. And that is a remarkable achievement, in my opinion.
I think so. And I think in terms of the story, Toy Story 25 years ago, I suspect we're going to have some form of celebration with the release of new DVDs and so on and so forth. But it's also that universal story of the tension between old and new. So you had obviously Woody, but you also had Buzz Lightyear from Star Command presenting the future of toys, potentially, you could argue by extension, the future of technology, the future of, life at home and that kind of things. And you've got this constant tension, but also, it's strangely, we're all very human, and we are, essentially exploring the flows of Woody wanted to obviously still be liked by all the other toys, but also importantly, be liked by, the boy who owned him and not being superseded by, obviously, Buzz Lightyear and the threat of, change. There was all stuff going on. But I think where, the movie worked really well is that actually, because of the wonderful acting by all concerned, not just Tom Hanks and Tim Allen, they were incredibly likable characters, all of them.
Yes.
But people don't know this. Disney got sight of the first script. Now, Disney is the distributor at the time of, Pixar working on Toy Story. And Disney wanted a movie that had more edge. They wanted the conflict between, Woody and Buzz Lightyear to be a bit more severe and dark and so on and so forth. And what is interesting is Pixar said, no. Sorry, you may be Disney and we may lose the biggest distribution company in the world, but we believe in the story. And that's not what we're going to do. Now, it wasn't as simple as saying no once, Roger. You'll appreciate that. It was back and forth. And the breakthrough came from essentially the co-owner of Pixar, no other than Steve Jobs.
Ah,
And now Apple bought Pixar in 1986, and I don't think we even knew that happened. And I'm guessing they must have bought them because they wanted to create, obviously, content for their platforms. Potentially back then, you'll tell me, Roger, Steve Jobs had aspiration for an Apple TV of sort or whatever it
hmm
might be, and therefore they wanted, to your point, their own media company or content production company. So Steve Jobs essentially became the intermediary between Pixar and Disney. And I think now that the kind of attachment to the two companies has been well documented. It wasn't known at the time, but they believed in the story so much and they believed in the characterization so much that they were prepared to walk away and find a different way of distributing.
that's very interesting. And the one of the things that always stays in my head about Toy Story is that one of the characters. I'll probably describe this a little bit wrong, but it was almost like a baby's head or a doll's head stuck on top of a crab or a robot
Mm.
crab or something. And it was genuinely quite disturbing, but also quite sad in a way as well. You know, it was made to look as if it was evil, and it also had that creepy music and the clicking of the claws or the tentacles or or the feet or whatever it was. But it was almost quite sad as well, as if the individual parts of it had been sort of mutated and pushed together by a child. And again, it was just maybe that was a little bit of the edginess that they allowed to go
Mm.
into the story. But I mean, just think about again how embedded within our culture this film and its sequels obviously has become. You know, the toys, video games, theme parks, spin-offs, all that merchandise from a film which was the first film, as you say, animated by computers.
And I think even for me now, it's hard to remember 1995 in terms of what was possible in and around computers. But it would have been the very very early days of you and I doing anything meaningful, I would say, with computers. So not only my memory of the story and the voice acting and so on is great, but I'd imagine that I would have been blown away by the quality of what had been created and crafted by using computers.
And again, the marketing around the film. I mean, they made a big thing out of the fact that it was computer animation, but they did play into the nostalgia, the aforementioned Mr. But there was a toy in there that every child or every adult who went to see it when they were a child will have played with one of those toys, whether it was the crocodile or Mr. Potato Head or the equivalent of Woody or the doll. And there was that nostalgia. I mean, I think that Toy Story is the only cartoon film, that I've been to see as an adult without a child in my life. Obviously, when I was a child, I went to see cartoons, and when I was a father with a child, I went to see cartoons. But I'm sure that it's the nostalgia in the marketing for Toy Story that made me go to see that film as an adult with no child in tow.
Which is interesting because it's back to this disconnect sometimes people can have with their content and the audience. And I am absolutely convinced. If you think about who was behind, obviously, the creation of Toy Story, there were adults that were looking back at their own youth. But you had writers like Joss Whedon behind Buffy
Mm,
the Vampire Slayer. You had Andrew Stanton, Joel Cohen. I mean, names that now are become part of the Hollywood Premier League, really. I mean, we must spend a moment to talk about the music and the singing from Randy Newman.
of
But
course.
the one thing that had me, I remember bursting into laughter out loud because I recognized myself in this, is when Woody is obviously planning something, probably how to go back home or whatever, and he uses the Hesker sketcher to actually plan it, and
That's
suddenly
right.
the
I
map of
know.
whatever he has to do can come through. And there was all these little moments where, as adults, we burst into laughter, and of course, a young child would look at you strangely, thinking, "Why are you laughing? There's nothing funny there." But you won't realize the hours I spent trying to do looking anything remotely interesting on the Hesse Sketcher. And back to the marketing. So interestingly, this film didn't really plan that far ahead, which
Mm.
suggests again that there's some sense of humility, but not sure what they had because of the constant back and forth with different forces out there, not just Disney. So actually, the merchandise came on much later, and sometimes was prompted by other parties. So what I meant to say to you, Roger, is sometimes others will see value in what you do sooner than you do yourself, and again, just listen. So in the case case of Pixar and Toy Story, it was the likes of McDonald's and the likes of toy companies and so on saying, "You've not thought of doing kind of toys version of the characters?" And Pixar were like, "No, just too busy making a film."
Yeah.
You've not thought of making sure that there is a zone in Disneyland just for Toy Story? No, just too busy making a film. So I think sometimes this partnership will come much, much later. And it may well be that it was just the right thing for the creators to focus on creation, and sometime for the marketing and everything else that comes to come later, and not be burdened by having to think too many things at the same time.
Now that's very, very interesting, isn't it? And it's probably the thing that we can end on. But when you're putting content together, you probably should focus on the content, the message in the content itself, rather than thinking about how it's going to be repurposed. Because I think that had Pixar gone into this thinking, we're making a film so that we can sell loads and loads of Buzz Lightyear dolls and loads of Woody dolls and loads of Mr. Potato Heads, they may not have come out with as good a film as they did, because they focused on the story, they focused on the acting, they focused on the music, and they focused on the nostalgia. And all of that repurposing, I guess you could call it, came later. So focus on what you need to get done first, and the other things will slot into place, I think.
Absolutely. So just to close, I would like you, Roger, and our viewers and listeners to start to hum in your head the "You've Got a Friend in Me" song from Randy Newman, because to this day, if I hear it, I just get almost a tear in my eye.
I have to say, the Toy Story films, and I think it was called Up, wasn't it? Was the
Correct
Pixar film with the little old man in it?
Ooh,
Those are perhaps the only cartoons in history that have made me cry. I'm lying. Dumbo made me cry when I was a child, but as an adult, the Toy Story and Up are the only films that have made me cry. My goodness, Pascal, we've done another episode, and as always, the nostalgia that just flows out of the screen when we start talking about films is amazing. So I'm going to draw this to a close. Everybody, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening to Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. Listen, please subscribe. Leave us some comments and suggestions in all the places where you consume your podcasts or where you consume your videos. And until next time, go out there and make sure your marketing is done right. I was Roger Edwards and he was Pascal Fintoni, and we both say, see you next time.